This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
World Health Organization experts head to Geneva for an emergency meeting on the Ebola outbreak in the DRC and Uganda. Sudan's military admits it ordered the dispersal of a Khartoum sit-in that left nearly 100 people dead. And New Zealand's Christchurch mosque shooting suspect surprises the courtroom by pleading not guilty to all 51 murder charges. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Uganda's annual budget expands amid concerns of its growing debt levels. And in sports, South Africa sets up camp in Dubai as they prepare for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. Well, let's start the program in Kyrgyzstan at the 19th summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the country's capital city, Bishkek. Leaders of the 8 SCO member states, including Chinese President Xi Jinping, have gathered there for the two-day event. They've held a signing ceremony for agreements reached during talks that featured discussions on terrorism, regional development and global governance. After the signing ceremony, the leaders posed for a joint photo. The SCO is one of the world's most influential regional organizations and covers about 3/5 of the Eurasian landmass with about 3 billion people. The SCO is a Eurasian political, economic and security organization. It was founded in 2001 in Shanghai by the leaders of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the SCO member states and the observer delegations during the meeting. He said the organization should be a model for regional cooperation.
We should build the SCO as a prime example of mutual trust and mutual respect, adhering to the goals and principles of SCO and Shanghai spirit. We should keep adding new significance and content to the Shanghai spirit.
Now, turning to news from the continent, let's take a look at our coverage of the Ebola outbreak. The WHO's Emergency Committee is meeting today to decide whether the Ebola outbreak constitutes an international emergency. As we know, it started in the DRC last year, but so far 2 people, a boy and his grandmother, have died of the disease in Uganda this week. They arrived from the DRC. One other person in Uganda has been confirmed to have Ebola, and 3 people were in isolation but did not show symptoms.
The first cases of Ebola have crossed the border to Uganda from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Uganda is stepping up monitoring and vaccination against the deadly virus.
While the disease has crossed the border, there has been no documented local transmission. The exposure of these individuals occurred in Congo. However, it is a significant event. Including the boy and his grandmother, we have 3 confirmed cases. There's one other case that's been found positive, and there are 3 other contacts. They can be considered as suspect cases, but they're not unwell, but they're being tested as well. There are no other cases been detected, and there are about 27 people who've been identified as contacts within Uganda of that family group, and they're currently under surveillance.
Meanwhile, South Sudan is appealing for $12 million for a 6-month Ebola plan. It seeks to take urgent steps to make sure the country can respond if the virus crosses into its borders.
The confirmed cases in Uganda as a sobering reminder that the Ebola virus has no respect for borders. With outbreak in DRC not yet under control and spreading, we have to take urgent steps to further protect the people and residents in South Sudan.
Uganda has been rolling out strict screenings at the border with DRC. Anyone crossing the border with symptoms is being isolated. The WHO has also brought in 4,000 additional Ebola vaccines.
We are going to do what we call ring vaccination of the health workers who are at risk and those people who have been in contact with the patients. So with their other contacts, we are on ground everywhere in the district, in the health facilities, in the communities, undertaking surveillance.
The initial cases in Uganda mark the first time the virus has crossed an international border since the current outbreak began in Congo last August. The epidemic has already killed 1,390 people in eastern Congo. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Well, CGTN's Julia Lyubova is following the story for us from Geneva, Switzerland. She joins us now live with more on this story. Julia, of course, as we've seen, Ebola crossing the border from the DRC into Uganda. Is the WHO likely to now label this outbreak a public health emergency of international concern?
Well, that's right. The World Health Organization's Director General has today convened an emergency committee on the Ebola virus. This committee comprises of a panel of 13 independent experts, and they will try to ascertain whether this outbreak constitutes a public health emergency of international concern. This is now the third meeting of such committee. The first time it was in October 2018 and most recently in April 2019. And of course it comes after a young boy and his grandmother died of Ebola in Uganda after arriving in the DRC. And at least one more person has been confirmed as having Ebola as well. So the committee will ponder on whether this is an international concern. And well, so far the WHO says there is no known person-to-person spread of Ebola in Uganda. And in April, it actually decided against declaring it an international emergency because it was contained within the DRC. Of course, now the situation is very different, so we'll have to wait and see later today what the committee will decide.
And as you say, the situation now is different. And if this is declared an international emergency, what would be the implications indeed for the countries affected, but perhaps, you know, the world in general, especially in terms of trade and travel?
Absolutely. So the committee, and depending on their decision, and if they do decide to declare it an international emergency, they will make recommendations. And this could be a travel ban to the affected areas, so it could be even a trade ban to the affected areas. We'll have to see exactly what measures they would recommend. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, also said it had stopped its efforts, its monitoring of the virus in affected areas and also its vaccination efforts as well. But it says that so far there's been no panic reaction, and of course there will be implications for the affected countries. But the main effort now is to contain this virus and to prevent it spreading further.
And of course, as we know, it's been quite challenging to contain this virus in the eastern DRC. As a result of the spread into Uganda, are we going to see extra preventative measures or even further international action being put into place to prevent the further spread of Ebola within the region?
Absolutely. So, of course, the WHO is working very hard to prevent what we saw in 2015, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And already this outbreak has killed more than 1,300 people in the DRC. It is a very highly contagious disease. It is known by health experts as the disease of death because more than 70% of infections do lead to a death. So, of course, huge efforts are being made to prevent it spreading further. And so this is the third emergency committee meeting now. So, so far they haven't declared it as an international emergency, but if they do, then some experts say it is likely to be so because it now has spread beyond the DRC's borders. And if that happens, then efforts such as boosting public health measures, funding, recommendations on travel bans or trade bans, all of that could be put in place.
Julia Lyubova, thank you so much, joining us there live from Geneva, Switzerland. And of course, we await that decision that is yet to be made by the WHO. Let's turn to news now from Sudan. The military has now admitted that it ordered the brutal crackdown on protesters on the 3rd of June. The military council says it regrets that some mistakes happened during that crackdown on the Khartoum sit-in. That military operation left at least 100 people dead. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala is following those developments.
Earlier this month, scores of protesters were left dead in a military crackdown in the capital, Khartoum. The Transitional Military Council has, for the first time, admitted that it had a hand in the incidents of that day.
We asked the military command to plan the dispersal of the sit-in according to the non-security and safe measures.
Protesters had staged the weeks-long sit-in outside the army headquarters in Khartoum since the overthrow of longtime leader Omar al-Bashir in April. The pro-democracy protesters have continued in their demands for the military council to hand over power to a civilian-led transitional body. Sudan's Transitional Military Council and the opposition have now agreed to resume negotiation talks. This follows mediation by Ethiopia, the US, and African Union diplomats. The international community has stepped up efforts to try resolve the crisis.
An international team to support the African mediation has been formed and is made up of representatives from the United Nations, the European Union, Troika, and some countries with a permanent membership on the UN Security Council, as well as some other countries.
The African Union envoy says it is expecting an investigation into the crackdown.
Our request is that a transparent and credible investigation is held. The African Union, in this regard, is prepared to play the role which is being requested from both sides, and I hope I have made this point clearly.
Life is slowly returning to normal in the streets of Khartoum after the strike ended. Meanwhile, protest leaders have requested for the removal of an internet blockade imposed since the deadly army crackdown. But the military council maintains that social media is a threat to national security. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Sudan's state prosecutor's office has said that Omar al-Bashir is being charged with corruption after the completion of an investigation. The prosecutor's office maintains that the charges against Bashir were related to laws on suspected illicit wealth and emergency orders. Bashir has already been charged in May with incitement and involvement in the killing of protesters. Prosecutors in the country have also ordered for his interrogation on suspicion of money laundering and financing terrorism. Now, at least 50 people have been killed and thousands of others displaced after tribal clashes broke out in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The clashes were sparked by the killing of traders by those suspected to hail from a rival tribe. Now, the governor of Ituri province, Jean Bamanisa, says 100,000 people have now fled to the provincial capital in Bunia. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
The fighting between the Hema and the Lendu ethnic groups broke out in the territory of Jugu in northeastern DRC. Local leaders say fighting escalated after members of the two communities carried out reprisal attacks to avenge the deaths of their tribesmen. The army had to intervene to stop the fighting. Several arrests have been made. Charity organizations say they recorded 72 deaths in the area. Ituri province has had a long history of land conflicts between the Hema and the Lendu. Tens of thousands of people from the two ethnic groups died in clashes between 1999 and 2003. The killings have occurred as the region struggles to contain the Ebola outbreak that has claimed more than 1,400 lives since August last year. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Let's turn to Mali now, where President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta has been calling for an end to tit-for-tat violence. On Thursday, the president visited the site of the latest massacre in Mali's Powder Keg Central region. It is a mosaic of different ethnicities. Now, according to the official death toll, 35 people, of which 24 were children, were left dead after unidentified attackers burnt down homes and opened fire on villages. The Sunday night attack targeted Sobaneda, a predominantly Catholic village in an ethnic Dogon enclave. The government is struggling to quell violence that began in the north of the country in 2012 and was sparked by radical Islamist and Tuareg militias. The attacks then spread to central Mali after a predominantly Fulani jihadist group led by preacher Amadou Koufa emerged in 2015.
There are no inter-ethnic conflicts in our country, and the days to come will prove it again. Yes, there are manipulations and audacious acts in order to destabilize Mali. Yes, but we will thwart those acts.
It is extremely serious because if we are not careful, it is going to break the country up. The instinct for revenge will take hold everywhere.
Le cycle infernal de la violence.
This hellish, vicious cycle of violence must be stopped at the risk that everyone will take justice in their own hands. It is necessary to emphasize the importance of the fight against impunity. The glimmer of hope in the horizon cannot be transformed into a true opportunity without an acceleration in the control of the security situation, especially in the center of the country. What happened on the night of the Sunday, the 9th and Monday the 10th of June in the village of Sobaneda in the Mopti region reminds us of the gravity of the situation, and this after the massacres of Kulugun and Ogo Sagu, respectively, on the 1st of January and 23rd March 2019, always in the same regions of Mopti.
Let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Egypt sets up a national committee to lead the fight against female genital mutilation.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, we start over in New Zealand now, where Brenton Tarrant, the man accused of shooting dead 51 people at 2 mosques in Christchurch, has pleaded not guilty to all charges. On March 15th, the self-proclaimed white supremacist allegedly opened fire in the packed Al-Nur Mosque during Friday prayers. He then travelled across town to continue the carnage at a suburban Linwood Mosque. He live-streamed all these actions on social media. The 28-year-old Australian has been charged with 51 counts of murder, 40 counts of attempted murder and 1 terrorism charge. Judge Mander has set a trial date for May 4th next year for the worst massacre in modern New Zealand history. About 80 survivors and relatives of those killed filled the courthouse for a glimpse of Tarrant.
At the moment I cannot talk for the moment. A bit hard for us to just talk right now. We see his ugly face, we're not in the things we can talk right now. Inshallah, if I come a bit later, if we have something to say, inshallah, we will come and talk with us. Thank you very much.
And if the process is also very lengthy, we don't know yet when it will finish. During next year, maybe February or May. So it's a very lengthy process. You watch him on the screen. It's very hard here, you know. I feel very sad.
But the judge said it will be take longer the next year, May, which is long times. We don't want to. We want to as soon as they can do it for us. Make me happy. 51 people cannot coming back to us. Never coming back.
And let's turn our attention to Somalia now. The country has in recent years suffered deadly militant attacks carried out by the Al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist group Al-Shabaab. But a multinational peacekeeping force stationed in the Horn of Africa nation has helped turn the tide against Africa's deadliest militant group. But faced with a funding shortfall and lack of manpower, the United Nations Security Council now insists the mission must withdraw 1,000 uniformed personnel by February 2020. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo sat down with Ambassador Francisco Madeira, who's head of AMISOM, and the Special Representative of the African Union Chair to discuss AMISOM's challenges, Al-Shabaab's threat, and the drawdown of African Union troops from Somalia.
Ambassador Francisco Madeira, thank you for speaking to CGTN. Now, let's talk about the recent decision by the United Nations and the recent mandate given to AMISOM, the extension of 1 year. Now, many, including the African Union itself, have expressed concerns about the potential drawdown of African Union troops, not just because of recent Al-Shabaab attacks, but also not because Somalia is rebuilding, but we've witnessed the pullout of Burundi earlier this year led to some security loopholes in the Middle Shabelle region, where Al-Shabaab launched attacks and seized some rural villages. How worried is the African Union?
Thank you, CGTM, for having me. The Security Council Resolution 2472 of late last month is an important document for AMISOM and for the African Union. It has renewed our mandate for another year. And so it is a resolution that clearly indicates that we should all be geared to supporting the efforts of the government in bringing peace and security and stability to Somalia. And we, as AMISOM and as African Union, are doing just that and are going to comply with this resolution in the letter and the spirit. We are in Somalia to help Somalia to stand on its feet. At the measure Somalia is standing on its feet, we have to exit because we are not a colonizing power. And the moment the Somalis say they can take this, we take it, we give it to them. The latest drawdown of the Burundians, as far as I know, has not led to the occupation of any forward operating bases by Al-Shabaab. The Burundians have withdrawn in a planned manner, and it has been done in a manner that it would ensure that the most significant forward operating bases that needed to be secured remain secured. We are there in those, and we expect and we are working with the Somali authorities to ensure that there are forces that are generated to take those forward operating bases from us. And in that I have to tell you that we see that President Formaggio and Prime Minister Kaire are quite engaged and very active in ensuring that forces are generated to take over from us. Already we have, in this context, a number of countries engaged in generating these forces. And so far, we already have 2 important battalions which are already in the field operating as a result of this troop generation effort planned, conceived, and implemented by the FGS.
We've had recent challenges with the African Union about funding. Now, is the drawdown about lack of funding, or is it about beating the deadline set by the UN Security Council?
The drawdown is about implementing a decision of the only authorized entity to keep peace and security in the world, the entity that is responsible for peace and security of the world, the Security Council. They have decided that we have to draw down 1,000 in 2017, another 1,000 in 2018, and another 1,000 by the end February 2020. And we are going to implement that. That is what I think it is.
Ambassador, African Union mission in Somalia has been in the country for quite over a decade now, and you've worked alongside the Somali National Army. Now, based on the years of experience, do you think the Somali National Army is capable right now of standing on its own as a strong force to take over security?
What is important is not whether they are capable of right now standing to take over. What is important is whether they are making progress in preparing themselves to take over. If you look at what happened in Sabid and what happened in Barire, what is happening in other places, you can see that there is tangible progress being made in preparing the Somali forces to take over.
Every year on June 14th, Egypt celebrates Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Day. Now, this year, to mark this occasion, the nation has announced the formation of a national committee dedicated to the cause. FGM in Egypt is still extremely widespread. The government is now increasing its efforts to collaborate with international organizations to decrease the rate of women who undergo this procedure. Here's CGTN's Adel El-Mahri with more.
About 20 years ago, 97.5% of Egyptian women aged from 15 to 49 have undergone female genital mutilation procedure. The latest research conducted shows the figure dropping to only 94%. FGM is still critically widespread in this North African nation.
What has been achieved does not live to our aspirations. By 2010, those women who had not gone through FGM, the rates were only 2.5%. After criminalizing the procedure, it started to go up. After Egypt imposed harsher penalties, the rates went up again, but we are far from near satisfactory results.
Signing international agreements criminalizing FGM made Cairo committed to fighting that ancient habit. This year, Egypt decided to create a body dedicated to the cause, the National Committee for Eradicating Female Genital Mutilation.
The National Committee's task is to implement the state's plan to combat female genital mutilation. Terminating it is primarily set for 2030. We're trying to increase awareness. We want to stress that it is a crime. We aim to unify messages and coordinate efforts of all working on this issue in Egypt, so this way we can be more efficient.
On June 14, 2007, Budur, a 14-year-old girl, died during an FGM operation. The incident has shook the country. Since then, Egypt has been marking FGM Day on that date every year to commemorate her tragic death. The road is still very long ahead of Egypt in its fight against female genital mutilation. This week, Egypt is marking its FGM Day, realizing the magnitude of the challenge and renewing its commitment to protect Egyptian girls from that procedure. Adel El-Mahri, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, let's go to the Central African Republic, where prisoners and officials are exploring creative ways of providing enough food to feed inmates. To deal with the nutritional dilemma, the United Nations mission in the country is helping the Berberati Correctional Facility by introducing basic agriculture to help sustain food security there. CGTN's Michael Karanja has the details.
Under the supervision of corrections officers, inmates at the Berberati Correctional Facility in the west of Central African Republic prepare for a meal. It is lunchtime for the detainees, the only meal of the day. 89 inmates will share these small balls of cassava and the vegetable soup that accompanies it.
Since I took the service, I receive about $350 per month for the prisoners' food.
This sum is woefully insufficient. To help the detainees to feed themselves, the UN peacekeeping mission in the country supports the prison authorities in cultivating their own field of cassava.
The purpose of this field and the cassava plantation is to strengthen the diet of the detainees to ensure their food security.
This allows the prisoners to learn the basics of agriculture, a skill they can use once they complete their sentences.
The detainees stay in prison without doing anything, so MINUSCA has asked for the help of national NGOs to help them with some training in agriculture, so when they come out, they do not repeat their past mistakes.
In addition to this, the prisoners cultivate a small vegetable garden.
This garden is used to feed the prisoners because these plants are part of their food ration.
While waiting for their cassava to be harvested, The prisoners and the officers are forced to find creative ways to provide enough food. One of these ways is by using money collected from a mass held at the prison to also contribute to its own food fund in the hopes that it will help in stabilizing provision. Michael Karanja, CGTN.
Let's take a short break. Here's what's coming up in your business news. Uganda's annual budget expands amid concerns of its growing debt levels. And Kenyan lender Equity Bank bags a license to operate in Ethiopia.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Right, we start your business news in Uganda, where the government has presented budget estimates to Parliament for the financial year 2019-2020. Now, the budget is worth about $11 billion, and the lion's share goes towards debt servicing. International economic experts have warned Uganda against the rising debt, saying it may soon reach unsustainable levels. CGTN's Michael Baleke has that report.
The 2019-2020 budget estimates have gone up by almost $3 billion compared to last year's $8.7 billion budget. Much of the money will go towards debt repayments. Uganda has been cautioned by institutions including the International Monetary Fund over the country's rising debt.
Uganda compares very favorably with its peers because most of our debt has been contracted on concessional terms. Our debt has financed priority and productive sectors which will generate positive economic returns, and the ability to pay back is enhanced.
Uganda's debt, according to the finance minister, stands at $11.5 billion, and he says that's way below the risky international threshold.
Government will continue to exercise caution while taking new debts. The rate of debt accumulation is expected to reduce in the medium term as flagship infrastructure projects are completed.
Uganda is borrowing heavily to finance new roads, airports, power dams, and oil and gas infrastructure. The government plans to finance the budget using domestic revenue collections, resources from the Petroleum Fund, and external debt. Some economic analysts here argue that the sector-by-sector allocation of resources in the new budget do not reflect the correct national priorities, like in the case of agriculture. The sector employs more than 70% of the population in Uganda, making it the main driver of the country's economy, according to Bank of Uganda. But this year, the sector has received less than $400 million, far less than the 10% African Union member states' annual commitment towards agriculture.
Right now, service delivery is very, very poor in most of the upcountry places where you go to. You realize most hospitals don't have medicine. Kids are still, studying under trees. Now, if we fail to actually sustain our debt, then service delivery is most likely to actually be worse.
Security, education, water and environment are some of the other sectors expected to take a big share. However, unemployment, income inequality and malnutrition are seen as the main challenges for the next year. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, in Kenya, the government will more than double capital gains tax resulting from sales of property to 12.5%. That's from the current 5%. Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich proposed the increase, set to be implemented next month, to widen the tax base. If approved by Parliament, the law will require that transferors pay the Kenya Revenue Authority 12.5% of their net gain. The capital gains tax in the East African community ranges from 20 to 30%. The tax in Kenya is still below the regional average, but Treasury Secretary offered exemptions in various contexts, including companies relocating their businesses, property meant for administering the estate of a deceased person, or transfer of property between spouses as part of a divorce settlement. Well, the Ugandan government has banned all public gatherings in its western Kasese district to prevent further cases of Ebola. The decision follows the death of 2 people in the country, days after the deadly virus spread from neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. Leon Senyange reports.
Uganda's health ministry is intensifying its Ebola response. Health authorities have banned public gatherings in the Kasese district, where 3 patients were being treated for Ebola.
The ministry would like to reassure all Ugandans and all other residents in Uganda that with the experience and expertise available in the country and the over 10 months of preparedness, the disease will be contained.
The Ministry of Health is set to carry out ring vaccination of all people believed to have come in contact with the confirmed Ebola cases. More than 400 doses of vaccines have been made available. Health officials say vaccination is scheduled to start on Friday, but there'll also be extensive surveillance at the unofficial entry points at the Uganda-DRC border. Thousands of people cross through the shared border posts with the Democratic Republic of Congo.
People should get to know facts about Ebola. If they know how to detect it, they can quickly report for a person who crossed through these informal border points and is staying in a specific village if they are seeing some unusual signs or symptoms on this person in the family.
The western part of Uganda, where the cases have been reported, has several major tourist sites. The health ministry says tourists visiting the area aren't in danger, and the industry isn't letting its guard down.
We vet the place in terms of, are they the people in the communities vaccinated? They get the treatment? Is the area code really safe? So we look at all that. We put it into consideration before we dispatch our tourists. Yeah.
The current Ebola epidemic started in August last year in eastern DRC and has killed over 1,200 people. More than $18 million has so far been spent by the government of Uganda and its partners on the Ebola preparedness and readiness. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Kenya's Equity Bank has become one of the first foreign banks to acquire a license to operate in Ethiopia. The bank has opened a representative office in Addis Ababa as it prepares to start operating in the neighboring country by July 2019. Now, Equity Bank's entry into Ethiopia is a big move for a country that previously guarded its banking sector tightly. Kenya's largest lender by customer base intends to use digital platforms and virtual banking to reach the millions of Ethiopians who lack access to financial services. Equity Group moved into Zambia and Mozambique in May 2019 and already has subsidiaries in South Sudan, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda and the DRC. And let's go to South Africa now. Cape Town is turning to work placement platforms and the private sector to reduce youth unemployment. The economic hub recently invested about $500,000 into its Cape Information Technology Initiative to train young people from disadvantaged areas. Here are those details now with Travis Andrews.
It's a common sight often seen in marginalized communities throughout the city. Unemployed youth in a desperate search for jobs and opportunities. But for some, those days are slowly changing. That's because when it comes to the youth, the city is rolling up its sleeves and turning to work placement platforms such as Lulaway to create jobs for young people. It's also decided to make sustainable job creation partnerships with the private sector an outcomes-based work development venture.
What we did with this tender, instead of saying we want to see certain kind of outputs, as in you've got to do certain kinds of training, you've got to do certain kinds of things like that, we actually said we're going to measure you on the outcomes. And those outcomes have to be employment. So we don't just want to see you train people for training's sake. We want to see you actually train people and then place them into work. And the longer that they are then placed into work, the more that you will then get paid as a service provider.
With an unemployment rate of around 24%, it's easy to see why the city is taking a somewhat different approach to job creation. For many of these youth, it has to start somewhere. And with more than 30,000 job seekers already finding employment on the company's online youth employment engine, using innovation has become one of the key successes.
Job seekers were in the townships, opportunities were usually outside of the townships, and information about jobs, access to jobs, the opportunity to apply for jobs was quite divided. There was limited access, and so we realized that we needed some sort of infrastructure in the townships linked to some sort of tech platform.
The platform also has companies which are affiliated to its database and provide immediate placements to suitable candidates in posts in the retail, government and security sectors.
We've already seen over 2,000 people actually being employed through this process. So it has spoken to a huge need that's out there to try and match unemployed people with potential employers. So this is certainly something that we see as a huge success, and we certainly want to encourage it going forward.
But it's not just the entry-level work environment that the city and the private sector hope to change, because successful candidates often end up giving back, sharing their knowledge and experiences with a new batch of candidates who hope to go even further in exciting new career paths. It is by no means an easy task taking the youth off the streets and into jobs, but the collective action of stakeholders such as the government, municipalities and the private sector is beginning to pay dividends, so that youth employment opportunities can be aligned with the growth of the broader economy. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. A Danish artist raises awareness about the dangers of phosphate mining in Senegal.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Khartoum, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In Senegal, a Danish artist is raising awareness about the socio-ecological damage caused by the global resource extraction industry. Christian Danielowicz's exhibition in the capital Dakar ends on the 28th of June. Here's CGTN's Laura Walubengo with that story.
This is the PO4 Blackout exhibition. It forms part of the work of Danish artist Christian Danielowicz. He's raising awareness on environmental issues in Africa. His inspiration comes from phosphate mining activities in the Tiber mines located just outside the Senegalese capital, Dakar.
This exhibition will be able to generate discussions, and thoughts and reflections on these issues, maybe even generate possible solutions to these problems.
The current rates of extraction suggest that worldwide phosphate resources will be depleted in 1 century. But beyond concerns for the future of the resource, the process of mining the phosphate is toxic, leading to chronic health problems for the local population and spoiling harvests.
This piece we see here, which basically is an ecosystem that is contained within this wooden structure that is sheltered by these zinc sheets, which are in an advanced state of oxidation, maybe even disintegration. These sheets are used to cover the village mosque in Ghat, and they are sort of an evidence to the toxic pollution. What this sulfuric acid in the atmosphere in the village does is that it attacks the built environment, such as these zinc sheets here, and oxidates them very rapidly.
Christian Danielewicz has launched an emergency plea to protect populations affected by the poor exploitation of mining resources. The artist aims to continue to raise awareness through new exhibitions in the coming years. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
A group of brave and daring South African teenagers will be attempting to break a world record by flying a self-built plane across Africa. They also want to inspire other young Africans through their journey to dream big. The plane took 3 weeks to assemble and is now ready to be flown from Cape Town to Cairo. The first-time flight coincides with Youth Month being celebrated in South Africa. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
The Sling 4 aircraft is built in South Africa and exported around the world. It was put together for the first time by a group of 20 team technicians.
So the building process, I learned a lot. So I didn't actually know that you get different parts of an airplane. I didn't know you get to center fuselage. I only knew there was a cockpit, a tail, and wings. I didn't know a vertical and a horizontal stabilizer, but I actually learned a lot of aviation terminology.
The plane has passed the security checks and has been cleared for flight.
Safety was an extremely important concern. That's why engineers and technicians who were part of the program all the way through. The plane's actually built up to factory standards, and we've got a safety plane that's also flying along with 2 safety pilots that's going to make sure that everything goes 100% right and that the students make the right decisions in difficult situations.
It will take off from Cape Town, the southernmost point on the continent. The teens are hoping to print their names in the record books.
I'm going to be one of the pilots. I'm going to be flying the tour over South Africa, Cape Town, and then fly to Windhoek. I'm going to be getting off from Windhoek, and another guy will be taking over. The reason why we're doing this is to give everyone a chance and the feel to fly from Cape to Cairo.
I'm overwhelmed, to say the least, but excited beyond measure. I can't wait for this. This is going to be one hell of an adventure. This is something extremely new, and very few people have done this.
The crew will need to take heed of the weather and political instability in some areas, but they will stop in several African countries, including Namibia, Malawi, Tanzania and Kenya, as they make their way to the northern part of the continent.
We're going to disadvantaged areas where we'll be giving disadvantaged people the flight for the very first time ever, and just showing them that what we've done and showing them that your past does not equal your future.
It's expected to take these adventurous teenagers 5 weeks to complete this historic flight. The final destination is Egypt's capital, Cairo, the land of the pharaohs, and the Great Pyramid of Giza. Judy Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
RightsCon is the world's leading summit on human rights in the digital age. It brings together business leaders, policymakers, general counsels, government representatives, technologists, and human rights defenders to connect, strategize, and shape the future. Tunisia will host the event that comes to Africa and the Middle East for the very first time. Let's get more now from CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
Tunisia is hosting the 8th session of the World Conference on Human Rights in the Digital Age, RightsCon. The international event seeks to reinforce and protect the digital human rights in order to establish a free and open internet network and to consolidate the rights and freedoms guaranteed by international laws and treaties.
We have a program of 450 sessions. There's 17 program tracks. It's everything from artificial intelligence and algorithmic accountability to data protection and privacy to smart cities to the sustainable development goals. So there's really a range of topics that will be covered, elections and misinformation. And so this is really the place where we talk about everything that is intersecting with human rights and technology.
RightsCon endeavors to ensure the progressive development of international digital human rights in Africa and the world.
And we're still not knowing what's best to do. And
specifically in the context of African countries, I think it's really interesting because we see a lot of governments wanting to leapfrog and have new technologies right off the bat. But it's really important that we take the time to think through these technologies and how to best institute them in a way that benefits the user best.
Digital strategies shed light on growing consumer discomfort with large-scale data collection by international companies and some social networks.
In my opinion, everyone should be self-determined about what happens to their data, because just like your own body, your body belongs to you, so the data belongs to you as well. So everyone should determine by themselves if they want to give those data away or not.
Digital security, business and human rights management, and other rights related to modern technology and its influence on human rights are also on the agenda of the conference.
In 2018, the World Conference on Human Rights in the Digital Age was held in Toronto, Canada, and brought together more than 2,500 participants from over 118 countries. Organizers say this year's three-day event has been successful on all levels. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Sports news up next, coming up.